They say blood is thicker than water. But what happens when that blood is poisoned by lies, betrayal, and a sister who'd rather see you erased than share the spotlight? I couldn't believe what I was hearing when my own father raised his glass at my sister's baby shower and called her unborn child his first grandchild, completely ignoring my 7-month-old daughter sleeping upstairs. The truth hit me like a freight train in that moment. I'd been backstabbed by the one person who was supposed to have my back, and the shocking part? This wasn't just favoritism. This was calculated, systematic destruction orchestrated by someone who shared my DNA. You think you know what family betrayal looks like until you discover your sister has been impersonating you online, stealing your mail, sabotaging your career, and selling your daughter's inheritance, all while playing the perfect golden child to parents who refused to see what was right in front of them. What happened next changed everything, exposed secrets that had been buried for years, and proved that sometimes the only way to reclaim your dignity is to burn down the lies and let everyone see the ashes. Then the real question became, was I seeking revenge, or was I just demanding the justice that had been denied to me my entire life? I couldn't believe what I was witnessing at that moment. There I was, standing in the corner of my parents' living room in Charlotte, watching my father raise his champagne glass high in the air, his eyes glistening with pure joy as he toasted my sister Rebecca's unborn baby. The words that came out of his mouth felt like daggers piercing straight through my chest. He was calling this child his first grandchild, completely erasing the existence of my 7-month-old daughter, Emma, who was sleeping peacefully upstairs. Betrayal doesn't even begin to describe what I felt coursing through my veins. This wasn't just a slip of the tongue. This was the culmination of 28 years of being invisible in my own family. My husband David squeezed my hand so tight I thought my fingers might break, and I knew he felt the same rage bubbling beneath the surface that I did. The guests at this lavish baby shower, and trust me, it was lavish in ways mine never could have been, all raised their glasses with bright smiles, completely unaware of the shocking truth sitting right there in that room. Rebecca stood there with her hand on her barely there bump, soaking in all the attention like she always did, that smug little smile playing on her lips that I'd seen 1,000 times before. She caught my eye for just a second, and I swear I saw something flicker there. Was it guilt, or was it satisfaction? This moment of blatant favoritism was just the tip of an iceberg that had been growing since the day she was born. Growing up, I'd always told myself it was normal, that parents couldn't possibly love their children exactly the same way, right? But what I experienced wasn't just a difference in parenting styles. It was systematic erasure, a calculated pattern of making me feel like I was somehow less deserving of love, attention, and dignity. When Rebecca came into the world, it's like someone flipped a switch in my father's heart, and suddenly I became background noise in my own life story. The truth was staring me in the face all those years, but I'd been too young, too hopeful, too desperate for his approval to really see it. Watching him now, gushing over Rebecca's pregnancy while my own daughter, his actual first grandchild, might as well have been a ghost. Something inside me finally snapped. I felt my face flush hot with humiliation as relatives came up to congratulate Rebecca, asking her about nursery colors and baby names, while I stood there holding my phone with countless photos of Emma that no one had asked to see. This wasn't karma. This was deliberate, orchestrated injustice, and somewhere deep in my gut, I knew Rebecca had played a much bigger role in this family drama than I'd ever imagined. My mother whispered something in Rebecca's ear, and they both glanced at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Pity mixed with something darker. The champagne tasted bitter in my mouth, but I forced myself to take another sip, because what was happening in that room was about to change everything. That toast wasn't just about celebrating a new baby. It was the moment when years of silence, swallowed pride, and unspoken pain finally demanded to be heard. I looked at David, then at the stairs where Emma slept, innocent and perfect, and I made a decision, right then and there. This cycle of favoritism, this pattern of treating me like I was somehow less than, like my life milestones didn't matter. It ended tonight, but I didn't know yet just how deep Rebecca's manipulation went, or how many lies I was about to uncover. The favoritism didn't start with that toast. It had been building like a storm cloud over my entire childhood, casting shadows on every birthday, every Christmas, every single moment that should have been special. When Rebecca turned 16, Dad bought her a brand new BMW, cherry red with leather seats, the works. I remember standing in the driveway, watching her squeal with delight, and thinking back to my own 16th birthday when I'd gotten a used Honda Civic with a dented door and a check engine light that never turned off. "Be grateful for what you have, Sophie," Dad had told me back then, ruffling my hair like I was some charity case. But gratitude tastes different when you're watching your sister get everything handed to her on a silver platter while you're drowning in student loan debt that your parents refused to help with. College was where the inequality really became impossible to ignore, where I started keeping a mental tally of all the ways Rebecca's life was paved with gold while mine was covered in thorns. Dad paid for Rebecca's entire education at Duke, tuition, room and board, even her sorority fees and that ridiculous spring break trip to Cabo. Meanwhile, I'd worked 2 jobs throughout community college, serving coffee at 5 a.m. and waiting tables until midnight, just to avoid drowning in even more debt than I already had. The lies I told myself back then were almost comical. They're stretching themselves thin. Rebecca's younger. They've had more time to save. I'm building character through struggle. Looking back now, I see how I was gaslighting myself, making excuses for treatment that was fundamentally unfair and honestly shocking in its blatancy. Every family gathering became a stage for Rebecca's achievements, while mine were footnotes nobody bothered to read. When she graduated with her marketing degree, Dad threw her a party at the country club with over 100 guests, champagne fountains, and a live band that played until 2 a.m. When I finally finished my nursing degree, 2 years late because I'd been working full-time, Mom made a cake and we had dinner at Olive Garden. "We thought you'd prefer something low-key," she'd said, not meeting my eyes. The humiliation of it all wasn't just in the disparity, it was in how everyone pretended it was normal, how my aunts and uncles would pat my shoulder sympathetically while gushing over Rebecca's latest accomplishment like I wasn't even there. The jewelry, the heirlooms, the family treasures that were supposed to be passed down. Somehow they all seemed to evaporate before they could reach me. Grandma Martinez's pearl necklace that she'd specifically mentioned was for her first granddaughter, mysteriously ended up around Rebecca's neck at her engagement party. Dad's mother's engagement ring, the one I'd been promised since I was a little girl, suddenly became too valuable to give out and ended up in a safe deposit box that only Rebecca seemed to have access to. Every time I asked about these things, I got vague answers, dismissive waves of the hand, suggestions that I was being materialistic or petty for even bringing it up. The backstabbing wasn't just emotional, it was calculated, designed to erase my claim to anything that connected me to this family's history. By the time David proposed to me with a ring he'd saved for months to buy, I'd almost convinced myself that I preferred earning my own way, that Rebecca's silver spoon life was somehow less authentic than my struggle. But sitting at that baby shower, watching Dad's face light up for Rebecca's unborn child while Emma, his flesh and blood, his actual first grandchild, was treated like she didn't exist, something crystallized in my mind. This wasn't about cars or college tuition anymore. This was about my daughter's dignity, her right to be seen and loved by her grandfather. And as I watched Rebecca bask in the attention, accepting gifts worth more than everything I'd received in my entire childhood combined, I started to wonder if there was more to this story than just Dad's inexplicable preference. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have possibly imagined, was that Rebecca wasn't just the favorite daughter riding on Dad's inexplicable preference. She was the architect of my isolation, the puppet master pulling strings I didn't even know existed, systematically destroying my relationships with every single family member through a web of lies so intricate it would have impressed a con artist. It started small, or at least that's what I thought when Aunt Caroline mentioned she understood why I didn't want to come to her birthday party last year. A party I'd never even heard about. "Rebecca said you were going through something and needed space," Caroline had told me, her voice dripping with sympathy that made my skin crawl. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, but I brushed it off as a miscommunication, because surely my own sister wouldn't sabotage me like that. But the miscommunications kept piling up like bodies in a crime scene I was too blind to see. My cousin Jennifer's wedding in Savannah, Rebecca told the family I'd declined the invitation because I didn't approve of the marriage, when the truth was, I'd never received an invitation at all. Uncle Robert's surgery recovery. Rebecca apparently told him I was too busy with my own life to visit, when I'd been calling his house for weeks, wondering why he wasn't picking up. The pattern was there, glaring and obvious in hindsight. But in the moment, I just felt confused and hurt, wondering why my family was growing distant, why conversations would awkwardly stop when I entered a room. The betrayal ran deeper than I could have imagined, and Rebecca had been poisoning the well for years, painting me as antisocial, selfish, too wrapped up in my own drama to care about anyone else. When I got pregnant with Emma, I was so excited to share the news, to finally have something that would bring me closer to this family that always seemed just out of reach. I sent out invitations to my baby shower. Beautiful cream-colored cards with little pink elephants that I'd spent hours picking out, to every aunt, uncle, cousin, and family friend I could think of. The day of the shower came, and David and I stood in that rented community center with decorations we'd put up ourselves, a cake we'd ordered from Costco, and exactly 7 people showed up. 7 out of 40 invitations. I spent that entire afternoon smiling through tears, pretending it didn't matter, telling myself that people were busy, that life happens. What I didn't know was that Rebecca had intercepted most of those invitations from my parents' house where I'd been staying that week, and she'd been making phone calls, sending texts, telling everyone I'd postponed it, that I was having complications, that I wanted to keep things private. The lies extended into every corner of my life, professional and personal, like poison seeping through cracks I didn't know existed. Rebecca somehow got access to my work email. I still don't know exactly how, and sent a message to my supervisor at the hospital, pretending to be me, turning down a promotion to the pediatric unit that I'd been working toward for 2 years. I don't feel ready for that level of responsibility, the email had said, words I would never have written in a million years. By the time I found out, the position had been filled, and my boss looked at me like I was unstable when I tried to explain that I hadn't sent that message. My reputation took a hit that day, and the humiliation of having to prove I wasn't crazy, wasn't self-sabotaging, nearly broke me. Rebecca had stolen more than opportunities. She'd stolen my credibility, my self-worth, my dignity. But the most shocking discovery, the one that made my blood run cold when I finally pieced it together, was what she'd done with the family heirlooms meant for Emma. Grandma's christening gown, the silver rattle that had been passed down through 4 generations, even the hand-embroidered baby blanket that Mom had specifically set aside for Sophie's first child. All of it had vanished. I found out later, through a cousin who'd seen them at an estate sale website, that Rebecca had sold them. She'd actually sold my daughter's inheritance, pieces of family history that weren't hers to take, and pocketed the money without a second thought. When I confronted Mom about it, she looked confused, said she'd given everything to Rebecca to hold on to, because I'd apparently told her I didn't want all that old stuff cluttering at my small apartment. Another lie, another piece of manipulation, another layer of betrayal that made me question every conversation, every memory, every interaction I'd had with my sister for the past decade. And as I stood there in that baby shower, watching Rebecca accept gifts and admiration, I realized something terrifying. She hadn't just been taking things from me. She'd been actively erasing me. The moment I started seeing the pattern, something shifted inside me. A switch flipped from hurt to determination, from victim to investigator. I couldn't just sit back and let Rebecca keep destroying my life, my daughter's future, and my relationships with everyone I'd ever cared about. So I started collecting evidence, piece by piece, like assembling a puzzle that revealed a picture so ugly I sometimes had to look away. Every deleted email I could recover, every screenshot of text messages where relatives mentioned things Rebecca had told them about me, every single receipt of her lies went into a folder on my laptop labeled Family Photos, innocuous enough that if anyone saw it, they wouldn't think twice. The truth was becoming undeniable, and I knew that if I was going to expose this betrayal, I needed documentation that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. David thought I was becoming obsessed, and maybe I was. But this wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about reclaiming the narrative that Rebecca had rewritten without my consent. I went through my old emails and found the bounced-back messages from my baby shower invitations, the ones that had been undeliverable, because someone had changed the email addresses slightly. Rebecca's handiwork, obviously. I contacted the community center where I'd held the shower and got copies of the guest list I'd submitted, versus the one Rebecca had apparently called to update on my behalf, claiming I wanted to keep it intimate. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, bless her heart, had a Ring doorbell camera that captured Rebecca coming to my apartment 3 times when I wasn't home, taking mail from my mailbox, including that promotion letter from the hospital that I'd never received. Watching that footage made me feel sick, but it also validated everything I'd been feeling, proved I wasn't paranoid or imagining things. The digital trail was even more damning than I'd expected, revealing a level of manipulation that bordered on criminal. I found fake Instagram accounts that Rebecca had created, using slight variations of my name, Sophie Martinez Wren, instead of Sophie Martinez Wren, where she'd post controversial opinions, rude comments on family members' posts, even inappropriate messages to my cousin's husbands. When Uncle Robert mentioned he'd seen my posts about politics and was disappointed in me, I finally understood why people had been treating me differently. I'd been confused for months, wondering why my reputation seemed to be crumbling, why people looked at me with disgust or disappointment. Now I had proof, screenshots of every fake account, every forged message, every lie she'd told while wearing my name like a costume. The backstabbing had gone digital, and Rebecca had weaponized social media to make me look unstable, unprofessional, and unlikable. My cousin Marcus, who works in IT and had always suspected something was off about the whole situation, helped me trace IP addresses and recover deleted messages that proved Rebecca had been impersonating me for almost 3 years. 3 years of systematic destruction, of calculated lies, of carefully orchestrated isolation. We found emails she'd sent to my nursing school friends, claiming I'd been talking badly about them, manufacturing drama that never existed. We discovered she'd called my in-laws pretending to be me, saying horrible things about David's mother that nearly destroyed my marriage before it even really began. Every piece of evidence felt like a punch to the gut. But I kept collecting, kept documenting, because I knew that when I finally revealed the truth, it had to be so comprehensive, so undeniable, that even my father, who'd chosen Rebecca over me my entire life, couldn't look away. The infidelity wasn't romantic, but it was a betrayal of sisterhood, of family bonds, of every value we were supposed to hold sacred. But the smoking gun, the piece of evidence that made everything else click into place, came from the estate sale website where Grandma's heirlooms had been sold. The seller's account was registered to Rebecca's email, and the listings had detailed descriptions that only someone with intimate family knowledge could have written. Stories about the christening gown, details about which ancestors had used the silver rattle, even photographs taken in what was clearly Rebecca's house. She'd stolen from Emma, from me, from our entire family legacy, and she'd been careless enough to leave a trail. I printed every listing, every transaction record, every message between Rebecca and the buyers. My hands shook as I organized everything into a presentation, cross-referenced by date and category. Financial fraud, identity theft, social manipulation, familial sabotage. This wasn't just about proving what she'd done anymore. This was about making sure she could never do it again, to me or to anyone else. The deeper I dug into Rebecca's digital deception, the more I realized this wasn't just sibling rivalry gone wrong. This was a calculated campaign to erase me from existence, to replace my identity with a distorted version she'd created. She'd made multiple fake accounts across every platform imaginable: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, even LinkedIn, where she'd created a profile that looked exactly like mine, but listed false job history and unprofessional behavior that could have destroyed my nursing career. I couldn't believe the level of premeditation involved. The hours she must have spent crafting these lies, maintaining these fake personas, responding to messages as me to friends and family who had no idea they weren't talking to the real Sophie. The betrayal went beyond anything I'd experienced before. Because she hadn't just stolen opportunities or possessions. She'd stolen my voice, my reputation, my very identity. Marcus showed me how Rebecca had been using VPNs and burner email addresses to cover her tracks. But she'd gotten sloppy in a few places, confident that nobody would ever question her or dig this deep. We found posts on a mommy forum where someone using a variation of my name had written terrible things about parenthood, about regretting having children, about wishing she'd chosen a different path, all designed to make me look like an unfit mother if anyone in the family ever searched for me online. When my mother-in-law had mentioned during Thanksgiving that she'd seen some concerning posts and wondered if I was okay, I'd thought she was being paranoid. Now I understood she'd fallen victim to Rebecca's web of lies, reading words my sister had written while pretending to be me. The humiliation of knowing that people I loved had been reading these fake confessions, believing I'd written them, made me want to scream. But Rebecca's manipulations extended beyond just social media. She'd infiltrated my professional life in ways that could have ended my career permanently. I discovered she'd sent emails to the North Carolina Board of Nursing, filing anonymous complaints about me using details only a family member would know. My schedule, my patients, even fabricated stories about medication errors I'd never made. Each complaint had been investigated and dismissed, but they'd left marks on my record, red flags that could have prevented me from getting hired elsewhere if I'd ever tried to leave. She'd called my workplace pretending to be a concerned patient's family member, claiming I'd been rude and unprofessional, forcing me to sit through disciplinary meetings where I had to defend myself against accusations that were completely false. The vindictiveness was shocking. The effort she'd put into destroying me was almost impressive in its thoroughness, and I realized this wasn't about Dad's favoritism anymore. Rebecca genuinely wanted me gone. The financial sabotage was equally devastating when I finally connected all the dots and saw the full picture of what she'd been doing. Rebecca had somehow gotten access to my credit card information. Probably during one of those times she'd stolen mail from my apartment and made small purchases that she then disputed, claiming fraud and making me look like I was careless with my finances. She'd signed me up for subscriptions I didn't want, services I'd never use, all billing to my accounts and damaging my credit score in tiny increments that I didn't notice until it was too late. When David and I applied for our mortgage, we were denied because of suspicious activity and inconsistent payment history that I couldn't explain. We'd had to rent for another year, watching our dream of owning a home slip away. And all the while Rebecca had been buying her perfect house with Dad's help, posting pictures on Instagram, living the life that should have been mine. Karma felt like a myth when the person doing wrong kept winning. Every fake account, every forged email, every stolen piece of mail told the same story. Rebecca didn't just want to be the favorite, she wanted to be the only daughter. She'd been systematically destroying my credibility, my relationships, my financial stability, and my mental health for years, all while playing the role of concerned sister to anyone who was watching. I found messages where she'd expressed worry about my instability to our aunts, planted seeds of doubt about my parenting abilities, even suggested to Dad that maybe I was experiencing postpartum depression and couldn't be trusted around Emma. The gaslighting was so comprehensive, so expertly executed, that I'd almost started believing I was the problem, that maybe I was paranoid or unstable or imagining things. But now I had proof, mountains of it, organized and dated and undeniable. And as I finalized my plan for Rebecca's baby shower, adding the last pieces of evidence to my presentation, I knew that the digital trail she'd left would be her downfall, just like she'd tried to make it mine. David sat across from me at our kitchen table in our small apartment in Charlotte, his laptop open next to mine. And for the first time in months, I saw something in his eyes that matched what I was feeling. Not just anger or hurt, but fierce determination. "We're not just going to that baby shower to smile and nod anymore," he said, his voice steady and calm in that way that always grounded me when I felt like I was spinning out of control. We were planning something that felt both terrifying and absolutely necessary. A moment of reckoning that would expose every lie Rebecca had told, every manipulation she'd orchestrated, every piece of betrayal she'd committed against me and Emma. This wasn't about revenge, or maybe it was partly about that, I won't lie. But more than anything, it was about justice, about reclaiming my dignity, and making sure my daughter never grew up thinking she was invisible to her own grandfather. My cousin Marcus became an unexpected ally in what we started calling Operation Emma's Justice, bringing his tech expertise and his own frustration with how the family had treated me over the years. He helped me create a comprehensive timeline, a visual presentation that would walk everyone through Rebecca's lies chronologically, showing how each piece connected to the others like a conspiracy board that finally made sense. We had photographs. Rebecca at my mailbox, Rebecca listing Grandma's heirlooms online, screenshots of her fake accounts next to my real ones for comparison. We had videos from Mrs. Chen's doorbell camera, audio recordings of voicemails she'd left pretending to be me, email headers proving the messages from me had come from her IP address. Every single piece of evidence was dated, verified, and cross-referenced. The truth was about to become impossible to deny, and I felt both excited and sick to my stomach, knowing what was coming. David's sister Jennifer and my best friend from nursing school, Angela, joined the planning sessions, helping me anticipate every possible reaction and prepare for any way Rebecca might try to deflect or minimize what I was about to reveal. "She'll call you jealous," Jennifer warned. "She'll say you're having a breakdown. She'll try to flip this so you're the villain." We role-played different scenarios, practiced staying calm when I wanted to scream, rehearsed the exact words I'd use to introduce the evidence without sounding bitter or unhinged. Angela, who'd been on the receiving end of one of Rebecca's fake emails claiming I'd been talking trash about her, had her own scores to settle and volunteered to be there as a witness, someone who could testify to being manipulated personally. The plan was growing, evolving, becoming something bigger than just my story. It was becoming a referendum on Rebecca's entire character, a public accounting of years of lies. We decided the presentation needed to be undeniable, but not cruel, factual but impactful, something that would shock people into seeing the truth without making me look vindictive or petty. Marcus created a video compilation, silent but devastating, showing the progression of Rebecca's deception, set to timestamps that proved premeditation and intent. We included statements from Mrs. Chen, from my boss at the hospital who confirmed the fake email incident, from the estate sale buyer who'd purchased Grandma's christening gown and remembered the seller being very eager to get rid of family items. Even Rebecca's husband Jake was unknowingly part of our evidence. We had screenshots of conversations where Rebecca had told him I was unstable and jealous, poisoning even her own marriage with lies about me. Everything was backed up in 3 different locations, printed in physical copies, and ready to be distributed if anyone tried to claim we'd fabricated it. The night before Rebecca's shower, I barely slept, running through every possible outcome in my mind until David finally pulled me close and reminded me why we were doing this. "Emma deserves a grandfather who knows she exists," he whispered. "You deserve a family who sees you for who you really are, not who Rebecca's made you out to be." I looked at our daughter sleeping in her crib, so innocent and perfect, and I thought about all the moments she'd already missed with my dad because of Rebecca's manipulation. His first time holding her first smile, her first laugh. Those moments were gone forever, stolen by my sister's need to be the center of attention, her willingness to sacrifice family bonds for her own ego. Tomorrow wasn't just about exposing Rebecca's lies. Tomorrow was about giving Emma the family she deserved, even if it meant burning down everything Rebecca had built on her foundation of deception. Walking into that country club ballroom felt like stepping onto a stage where I was about to perform the most important scene of my life. Except this wasn't fiction. This was raw, painful truth, about to explode in a room full of people who'd believed Rebecca's lies for years. The decorations were extravagant, of course. Pale pink and gold everywhere. A dessert table that probably cost more than my entire wedding. Centerpieces that looked like they belonged in a magazine spread. Emma was in my arms, wearing the beautiful white dress David's mother had bought her, her little hand gripping my finger as we walked past relatives who smiled politely, but didn't quite meet my eyes. I couldn't believe I was actually going through with this, that in a few minutes everything would change forever. But there was no turning back now. The truth demanded to be heard, and I was finally ready to speak it. Dad approached us about an hour into the party, his champagne glass already refilled twice, his face flushed with that happy glow that used to make me feel warm inside, but now just made me angry. "Sophie, sweetheart," he said, his voice carrying that slightly patronizing tone he'd perfected over the years. "When's it going to be your turn, huh? When are you going to make me a grandfather?" The room seemed to slow down around me, conversations dimming as people nearby turned to hear my answer. And I saw Rebecca across the room freeze mid-laugh. Her eyes locked on me with an expression I couldn't quite read. This was it. The moment I'd been planning for. The opening I needed. My heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. But my voice came out steady and clear when I said, "Dad, it already happened. 7 months ago." The confusion on his face would have been comical if it wasn't so heartbreaking. If it didn't represent months of my daughter's life that he'd missed. Because of Rebecca's manipulation and his own willful blindness. "What are you talking about?" he asked, looking around like maybe I was joking, like this was some weird performance art he didn't understand. I adjusted Emma in my arms so he could see her face clearly. Her big brown eyes. Eyes that looked exactly like his, actually. Staring up at this stranger who should have been her pop-pop. "Dad, this is Emma. Your granddaughter. She was born 7 months ago, and you've never met her because Rebecca made sure you didn't know she existed." The words hung in the air like smoke after an explosion, and I watched the truth slowly dawn on his face. Shock replacing confusion. His champagne glass slipping slightly in his hand. Emma, bless her perfect timing, chose that exact moment to reach out her tiny hand toward my father and say, "Pop, pop," in that sweet baby voice that could melt glaciers. David had been practicing with her for weeks, teaching her that word, preparing for this moment, and it worked better than any speech I could have given. Dad's face crumbled, actual tears forming in his eyes as he looked at this beautiful child he'd been cheated out of knowing, and then his gaze snapped to Rebecca with an expression I'd never seen before. Betrayal, anger, and dawning realization all mixed together. The room had gone completely silent now, everyone watching this family drama unfold in real time. And I saw Rebecca's facade starting to crack, her smile faltering as she realized her carefully constructed lies were about to collapse. "There's more," I said quietly, pulling out my phone where Marcus had loaded the presentation. "A lot more that everyone needs to see." Rebecca tried to laugh it off, that nervous titter she used when she was cornered, moving toward Dad with her hands up in a placating gesture. "Daddy, she's being dramatic. You know how Sophie gets—" But I cut her off, my voice stronger now, fueled by years of silence, pain, and humiliation, finally finding release. "No, Rebecca. No more lies. No more manipulation. Everyone here is going to see exactly what you've been doing, and then they can decide for themselves who's being dramatic." I handed Emma to David and pulled up the first slide on my phone, projecting it onto the wall using the venue's equipment that Marcus had helped me set up earlier while everyone was distracted. The first image was a split screen. Rebecca at my mailbox on one side, the stolen baby shower invitations on the other, dates and timestamps clear as day. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and I watched as the shocking truth began to dawn on face after face, including my father's. And there was no going back from what was about to unfold. The presentation played like a horror movie, where everyone in the audience slowly realized they'd been part of the story without knowing it, their faces shifting from confusion to shock to disgust as each piece of evidence appeared on that screen. I narrated calmly, my voice steady despite my hand shaking, walking everyone through the timeline of Rebecca's deception, the intercepted invitations, the fake social media accounts, the forged emails to my workplace. Aunt Caroline gasped when she saw the text messages proving Rebecca had lied about me declining her birthday party invitation, and Uncle Robert actually stood up when the footage showed Rebecca stealing mail from my apartment, his face red with anger. The truth was washing over the room like a tidal wave, drowning out Rebecca's protests, her attempts to interrupt, her claims that I was twisting things and taking everything out of context. But context was exactly what I was providing. Clear, undeniable, time-stamped context that showed this wasn't a misunderstanding or sibling rivalry, but systematic sabotage over years. The video compilation Marcus had created showed Rebecca listing Grandma's heirlooms on the estate sale site, her own face visible in the reflection of a mirror behind the christening gown, her email address right there in the seller profile for anyone to see. "Those were meant for Emma," I said, my voice breaking slightly as I looked at my daughter in David's arms. Family treasures that should have been hers, that Rebecca sold for cash like they meant nothing. Mom made a strangled sound, her hand over her mouth, finally understanding why I'd asked about those items months ago. why I'd seemed so upset when she'd said Rebecca was holding on to them. The betrayal was multi-layered, affecting not just me but the entire family legacy, and I could see people reassessing every interaction they'd had with Rebecca. Jake, Rebecca's husband, looked like someone had punched him in the stomach when the fake Instagram accounts appeared on screen. The ones where Rebecca had flirted with other men using my name. The inappropriate messages she'd sent to my cousin's husbands. The post designed to make me look unstable and desperate. "She told me you were jealous of our relationship," Jake said quietly, his voice barely audible in the silent room. "She said you'd been sending me messages, trying to cause problems." I pulled up the email headers, the IP address traces, the digital forensics that proved every message had come from Rebecca's devices, not mine. The humiliation on Jake's face was almost painful to watch. He was realizing his wife had been catfishing people using her own sister's identity, that the woman he'd married was capable of this level of deception. Several guests were recording now on their phones, and I knew this was going to spread beyond this room, that Rebecca's reputation was being destroyed in real time across social media. The hospital emails were what made Dad finally speak, his voice hoarse and broken in a way I'd never heard before. "She cost you that promotion?" he asked, staring at the forged message on the screen, the one where I had turned down the pediatric unit position I'd worked toward for years. "She sabotaged your career?" I nodded, showing him the investigation my boss had conducted, the confusion and damage control I'd had to do, the way my professional reputation had been tarnished by lies I'd never told. The infidelity wasn't romantic, but it was a betrayal of everything families were supposed to stand for: loyalty, trust, support. Dad looked at Rebecca with an expression that made her actually step backward, and I realized he was finally seeing her the way I'd been seeing her all along, finally understanding that his favorite daughter was a manipulator who'd been playing him like a puppet. The final slide was the most damaging, a compilation of messages where Rebecca had explicitly stated her intentions to various people, thinking those conversations were private and would never be exposed. Messages to her friend Melissa saying she needed Sophie out of the picture so she could be the only daughter that mattered. Texts to another friend laughing about how easy it was to fool everyone, and how Dad believes whatever I tell him. An email to the estate sale buyer where she'd written, "Getting rid of my sister's stuff, she won't even know it's gone." The calculated cruelty in her own words, the casual way she'd discussed destroying my life like it was a game, shocked even the people who'd known Rebecca for years. Karma was finally catching up. Justice was being served. And as I looked around that ballroom at the faces staring at my sister with disgust and disbelief, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: vindication, validation, and the deep satisfaction of knowing that the truth, no matter how long it takes to emerge, eventually demands to be heard. Rebecca's world didn't just crack that day. It shattered into a million pieces right there in front of everyone. And for the first time in my life, I watched her face the consequences of her actions without anyone rushing to protect her. Jake walked out of the ballroom without saying a word to her, his face pale and his hands shaking as he pushed past guests who tried to stop him. And I heard later from his brother that he'd called a divorce attorney before he'd even made it to his car. The betrayal he felt wasn't just about what Rebecca had done to me. It was about realizing he'd married someone capable of this level of manipulation, someone who'd lied to him every single day of their marriage, someone he couldn't trust around their unborn child. Within a week, he'd moved out of their perfect house and filed papers citing irreconcilable differences, though everyone knew the real reason was the shocking discovery of who Rebecca really was underneath that polished exterior. Dad's reaction was even more devastating to witness, and honestly, part of me felt sorry for him, even though he'd enabled Rebecca's behavior for years through his blatant favoritism. He sat down heavily in one of the ornate chairs, still holding Emma, who'd somehow fallen asleep against his chest during the chaos, and just stared at Rebecca like he was seeing a stranger. "How could you?" he kept saying, over and over, his voice breaking. "How could you keep my granddaughter from me? How could you destroy your sister like that?" The will changes happened within a month. I found out from Mom that he'd completely rewritten everything, removing Rebecca as executor, redirecting her inheritance into a trust for Emma instead, even putting conditions on what little she would receive that required her to seek therapy and make genuine amends. The financial consequences were just the beginning, though. Rebecca lost something more valuable than money that day. She lost her position as the golden child, the favorite, the one who could do no wrong. Social media became Rebecca's worst nightmare as videos from the party spread online, going viral in ways that made my stomach turn, even though I wasn't the one being exposed. Someone had live-streamed parts of my presentation, and suddenly thousands of strangers were weighing in, dissecting Rebecca's actions, sharing their own stories of family betrayal and manipulation. Her business. She'd been trying to start some kind of lifestyle blog and influencer brand, collapsed before it even really launched because nobody wanted to associate with someone who'd been publicly revealed as a liar and manipulator. Sponsorship deals she'd been negotiating fell through, her follower count dropped by thousands overnight, and the comments on her posts were brutal, relentless, calling out her hypocrisy and demanding accountability. The court of public opinion had rendered its verdict, and there was no appeal process for the kind of reputation destruction Rebecca was experiencing. Our extended family fractured in ways that were both painful and necessary, lines being drawn based on who'd been complicit in Rebecca's lies and who'd been genuinely deceived like me. Aunt Caroline apologized to me with tears streaming down her face, explaining how Rebecca had manipulated her for years, and we slowly rebuilt our relationship based on honesty this time. Uncle Robert cut Rebecca off completely, refusing to speak to her or acknowledge her at family gatherings, his anger over being lied to about my not caring about his surgery never quite fading. Even Mom, who'd tried so hard to stay neutral for years, finally admitted she'd suspected something was wrong, but had been too afraid of Dad's reaction to say anything. The family drama that unfolded over the following months was exhausting and painful, but it was also cleansing in a way, like lancing an infected wound that had been poisoning all of us for far too long. Rebecca tried to mount a comeback, posting tearful apologies on social media and claiming she'd been going through something and needed help, but by then it was too late. The evidence was too damning, the betrayal too comprehensive, the lies too calculated to be explained away by mental health struggles or temporary lapses in judgment. She'd moved back in with a friend from college, her perfect life dismantled piece by piece, her reputation in ruins, her marriage over, her inheritance redirected to the niece she'd tried so hard to erase. I wish I could say I felt nothing watching her fall, that revenge tasted sweet and pure, but the truth was more complicated. I felt relief, validation, and yes, some satisfaction, but also a strange sadness for the sister I'd thought I'd had. The relationship we might have had if she hadn't been so consumed by jealousy and the need to be the only one who mattered. Justice had been served. Karma had finally caught up, but the wreckage left behind would take years to fully process. And there was still so much healing ahead. 6 months after the baby shower that changed everything, I sat in my parents' backyard watching Dad push Emma on the little swing set he'd installed specifically for her, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, genuine peace that came from being seen and valued for who I really was. He'd spent those months making up for lost time, showing up at our apartment unannounced with toys and books, calling every few days just to hear Emma's voice, learning how to change diapers and warm bottles like he was a first-time grandfather, discovering the joy he'd almost missed. The favoritism that had poisoned my childhood was gone, replaced by something deeper and more authentic, a relationship built on honesty and the painful recognition of how close he'd come to losing both of us forever. I was a fool, he told me one afternoon, tears in his eyes. I let Rebecca manipulate me, and I failed you. I failed Emma. I'm so sorry, Sophie. My nursing career experienced an unexpected renaissance once the truth about Rebecca's sabotage became public knowledge, and my supervisor at the hospital actually apologized for doubting me about that forged email. They offered me a new position in the neonatal unit, even better than the pediatric role I'd lost, with a significant pay increase and acknowledgement of the injustice I'd suffered. My colleagues who'd been distant or judgmental, who'd believed the fake social media posts and rumors Rebecca had planted, reached out with apologies and support, finally understanding why I'd seemed so confused and defensive when they'd confronted me about things I'd never actually done. The dignity I'd lost through years of manipulation was slowly being restored, piece by piece, and I was learning to trust again, to believe that not everyone was secretly working against me. David and I finally got approved for our mortgage. Turned out fixing my credit score was much easier once we had documentation of Rebecca's fraud and identity theft, and we moved into a little house in a neighborhood with good schools and a yard where Emma could play. Dad helped with the down payment, insisting it was the least he could do after everything Rebecca had stolen from us, both materially and emotionally. The housewarming party we threw was small but genuine, filled with people who actually cared about us, who celebrated our success without hidden agendas or jealous undertones. Aunt Caroline brought homemade tamales. Uncle Robert fixed our leaky faucet without being asked, and even Mom seemed lighter somehow, freed from the tension of keeping Rebecca's secrets and managing Dad's favoritism. This was what family was supposed to feel like: supportive, honest, present. Rebecca, on the other hand, had fallen further than I'd ever imagined possible, and while I didn't actively wish her harm, I couldn't deny the karmic symmetry of watching her experience the isolation and rejection she'd tried so hard to force on me. Her blog never recovered. She'd moved to Atlanta to escape the gossip in Charlotte, and according to mutual acquaintances, she was working retail and living in a studio apartment, a far cry from the country club lifestyle she'd been so desperate to maintain. Jake had full custody of their daughter when she was born. The courts had taken one look at Rebecca's documented history of manipulation and deception, and decided she needed supervised visitation only. The baby girl she'd been so excited to use as leverage for attention, as proof of her superiority over me, had become another casualty of her lies. Sometimes I felt a pang of sympathy, wondering if she'd ever truly understand the damage she'd caused, but mostly I just felt grateful that Emma would grow up knowing her grandfather, surrounded by family who saw her and loved her without conditions. The healing wasn't linear or simple. There were still moments when I'd catch myself waiting for the other shoe to drop. Still nights when I'd wake up anxious that somehow Rebecca would find a way to manipulate her way back into everyone's good graces. But those moments became less frequent as time passed, as Emma's relationship with Dad deepened, as my career flourished, as David and I built a life based on truth, rather than navigating around someone else's lies. I'd reclaimed my narrative, exposed the betrayal, demanded justice, and found it, not perfectly, not without scars, but thoroughly enough that I could finally breathe without feeling like someone was standing on my chest. The family drama that had defined so much of my life was transforming into something healthier, something built on authentic connection, rather than manipulation and favoritism. And as I watched Emma laugh in her grandfather's arms, I knew that breaking the cycle of deception had been worth every uncomfortable moment, every accusation of being vindictive, every relationship that had to be rebuilt from scratch. This was what vengeance looked like when it was really about justice: messy, painful, necessary, and ultimately, healing. So here's what I want to know. Have you ever experienced this kind of family betrayal? Have you ever been the one overlooked, backstabbed, or erased, while someone else got all the glory and attention? Drop a comment below and tell me your story, because I know I'm not alone in this. What would you have done if you discovered years of lies and manipulation like I did? Would you have exposed it publicly or handled it differently? And here's the real question that keeps me up at night. When does seeking justice cross the line into revenge? Or are they really just two sides of the same coin when you've been humiliated and cheated for so long? I want to hear your thoughts on favoritism, on karma, on whether Rebecca got what she deserved, or if I went too far. Share your own experiences with family drama in the comments, the good, the bad, and the shocking truth that nobody talks about at holiday dinners. Your story matters, your pain is valid, and maybe by sharing it, you'll help someone else realize they're not crazy for feeling the way they do. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own family dynamics, or gave you the courage to stand up for yourself, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I share more stories like this, more insights into the messy reality of family betrayal, revenge, and reclaiming your self-worth that nobody else wants to talk about. These aren't your typical feel-good family stories. These are real, raw, and sometimes uncomfortable truths about what happens when the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally use that love as a weapon. Don't miss the next one, because trust me, the stories get even more intense, and the lessons get even more valuable. Subscribe now and let's continue this conversation about dignity, justice, and what it really means to fight back when you've been pushed too far.